international force attack him. So far, the skies are quiet here in Tel Aviv.
Richard Roth, thank you. Again, the President of the United States addressed the nation and the world in under an hour from now at 9 Eastern. We return to Baghdad at the Al Rashid Hotel.
All right, David, here we are. The sky is being lighted now by some bright flashes far in the distance. You remember, Peter, when we were children, our parents would tell us if there was lightning, you could tell how far the lightning was away by counting 1 1,000, 2 1,000. I guess you could do the same thing for bombs, can't you?
Maybe, John. I was just picking up on a comment by Wolf Blitzer from the Pentagon that the targets were basically defense suppression. This could well be the case here because I see no fires on the horizon. If they were hitting buildings or even, structures, we did see smoke earlier, but we don't see any flames. Maybe the targets have been surface-to-air missiles or whatever, but we do not see flames at this point, even though scores of bombs have been dropped in Baghdad so far this morning. John?
Peter, we should try to help analyze, if we can, for at least our own edification, these bright white lights that seem to be moving across the sky from south to north right now. The lights look like the lights you'd see from helicopters, but there's no sound out there.
It could be radar suppression material dropped from planes or from spotter planes of some kind. It could be to disrupt the radar defenses of Baghdad. That would probably be my guess. That's the only reason I'd be up there, John.
Yeah. Bernie Shaw is going to come over and talk to us now. Bernie?
Well, I just wanted to chime in on this speculation. They could be choppers, those choppers that have the very, very quiet engines.
Yeah, and they could be at a great distance away from us.
You mean our choppers or their choppers? I mean U.S. choppers or Iraqi choppers?
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I very much doubt that multinational force choppers are this far into the country. If they are, it would be another kind of operation.
Then they would have to be Iraqi choppers. Yeah. I know that I saw 2 choppers go by this hotel window.
Yeah. Well, I know early in the morning we've seen several runs by choppers by the hotel. Helicopters, of course. The Soviet Hind helicopters are the ones that they use mostly here in Iraq. Now, way off in the distance, many, many miles away, you can hear these blasts again coming through. Some more anti-aircraft fire. And I guess a little bit lower down on the ground, I'll once again let you hear the sound of what is going on over Baghdad tonight. Thing about this is you still can't hear the airplanes. You can't hear any sign of these planes that the anti-aircraft guns are being fired at.
Yeah, well, I'm anxious for daylight to come. Maybe we can get some visibility. From what we can see, the populated areas of Baghdad where all the people live, there doesn't seem to have been any bombing activity at all. The bridges are still standing. In fact, the bridges over the Tigris River are still lit. So we don't see any action at all within the city. Around us and a couple of government centers, there seemed to have been some bombing earlier, but right now, in fact, in the last half hour, the bombing has moved out seemingly beyond the perimeter of the city to presumably military targets, strategic targets, further west towards
Kuwait. That's correct. Kind of out of the immediate vicinity of Baghdad here. And I just looked out on the street a moment ago and saw a very small automobile driving down there. Peter, look at this. This is a bright flash of light that seems to be, it came across from north to south and even came up here by us in the hotel. And there it goes, almost like a shooting star.
I think that shooting star is probably an F-15, John.
Yeah. So that's what they look like at night when they're working. All right. It's good to know. There are a couple of vehicles out on the street, more anti-aircraft fire. Well, there's something going on that you can hear down there. It seems that maybe a bomb was just dropped again near the main telecommunications center here in Baghdad, and the anti-aircraft fire is again going up as the night sky continues to be brightly lighted in Baghdad. Peter.
Yes, John, that was a tactical strike. The plane could have been as close as 500 meters in the sky above its target. And certainly it's being met with a lot of anti-aircraft fire, but it is long gone at this point, John.
Yeah. These planes are moving so rapidly, and with the one bright light on them. I guess that's the engines themselves that we're seeing going by. This is something I've never covered before, ladies and gentlemen. Peter Arnett is our expert at CNN on war coverage, and I'm getting, this is a literal baptism by fire, isn't it, Peter?
Well, I don't think there is anyone alive, John, who is an expert on this sort of thing, being in the middle of a major capital with an airstrike, air attacks like this going on. I don't know if any experts exist.
Well, Bernie.
I'll tell you, I was just at the window and I saw that F-15 go by, or more accurately, I should say I heard it. And as you indicated, Peter Arnett, by the time that plane had cleared the space over here, it was out of sight. Only then could the anti-aircraft batteries respond to it, and as you said, it was much too late.
All right, since we did see another bomb go off near the major telecommunications facility, we better make sure that our viewers are still able to hear us. Let us just check in, make sure that you guys can still hear us in Atlanta and around the network.
John Holloman, Bernard Shaw, and Peter Arnett. Yes, indeed, we can hear you, and we're going now to the Pentagon briefly, and Wolf Blitzer.
David, here at the Pentagon, we're in the press briefing room where there is going to be a briefing with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell, and Defense Secretary Dick Cheney shortly after the president addresses the nation. That is in about 45 minutes. We are also receiving indications from Pentagon sources that this initial U.S. airstrike seems to be moving ahead on schedule, as planned, without any great disasters as far as the United States is concerned. One reason why there, so far, does not appear to have been any Scud launchings into Saudi Arabia or into Israel or into any of the other alleged targets that the Iraqis had is because we had been told repeatedly that those F-15s, those F-117A stealth fighters, those F-16s, all of the carrier-based U.S. aircraft, their immediate initial target, in addition to anything that could endanger those planes, would be all of Iraq's Scud missile bases, the mobile bases, certainly the fixed ballistic missile bases. They not only have the Soviet-made Scud ground-to-ground missiles, but also the Iraqis have improved some of those Scuds. They're called the Al Hussein and the Al Abbas. Those were day one, number one targets, as we and other networks have been reporting now for months. The United States was going to take those missile sites out. No indication completely, no confirmation that the United States has, but certainly if the Iraqis had planned to launch any of those Scud missiles, they almost certainly would have launched them within the first minutes of this war, and the war now appears to be about 2 hours old. David?
Operation Desert Storm now 1 hour and 3/4 old, and with me here in the studio, listening to it all along. The coverage from Baghdad is so compelling, we'll go back right away, but Secretary Weinberger, former Secretary of Defense through two terms of the Reagan administration. What about what you've been hearing?
Well, I think, first of all, we achieved complete tactical surprise, very much like the attack on Libya when the lights were all on and didn't go off until long after the raid began. Secondly, I think targets, radar and defense suppression was the principal goal, and the first wave probably didn't do any bombing, just in order to draw the radar and to identify the sites. And I think subsequent waves did do that. Thirdly, I think and there'll be more of that, of course, as we identify more and more radar sites. Finally, I think the targets that we had chosen have been very carefully chosen to be military only and to be well away from any kind of civilian casualty damage. That would be airfields, railroad stations, the communications tower that they keep mentioning, military assembly points, anything of that kind. And they will be very careful to select them so that even if the bomb misses by a short amount, it would not get into civilian damage. But primarily, this was to suppress the defense, the missiles and the radar, and to identify the radar. And I would imagine most of this raid will continue probably well into the morning hours, because with many of the defense points suppressed, the additional planes can go in with far less danger.
Secretary Weinberger, thank you very much for that perspective. Charles Bierbauer is standing by live at the White House, where the president is about to come on in a short time. I'm sorry, I'm hearing that there's another wave of planes coming into Baghdad, and we have 3 fine reporters there. Let's listen.
Dave, thank you. We're back here, and just as Secretary Weinberger was talking to us, we were watching another one of these waves of attack here. The night sky lit up once again, a lot of anti-aircraft fire, and We can hear the sounds of battle outside the window.
And once again, John Holloman, as the planes come in and just shoot across the sky, by the time these anti-aircraft batteries respond, it is too late.
It's interesting what Secretary Weinberger was saying, that what the planes, whoa, that was a bright light, everybody get down, in case there's a blast after. Okay, that was on the east side of our location.
That was definite bombing. That was on the other side of the hotel.
Yeah, look over here, Bernie, off to the west. A lot of bright lights down on the horizon now. It could be anti-aircraft or it could be incoming there.
Yeah. Well, let's let our viewers around the world listen to this exchange for a while.
Okay, Bernie, I'm going to crawl over to the window again with our microphone and just poke it out the window and let you listen to what we were able to hear so clearly here in Baghdad tonight. It's beginning to get quiet again. Peter?
Yes, John, on the other side of the hotel, it's a little noisier. Just 2 minutes ago, there were 3 enormous explosions that one after the other within seconds. I had no idea what the target was, but they shook the hotel on that side. So these bombing raids are continuing now, wave after wave, and the intensity has been maintained. I've noticed that the Iraqis have uncorked new kinds of anti-aircraft weapons. I don't know what they are, but
they appear to be heavier caliber,
they are spurting fire into the sky, heavier caliber. I don't know what they are, but they are more impressive than that used earlier. They're obviously uncorking other extra anti-aircraft defenses as this battle progresses.
Just one comment. Clearly, I've never been there, but this feels like we're in the center of hell.
It's a remarkable experience to be here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and the night sky again lit up with beautiful red and orange tracers and white flashes again as airbursts continue to come, probably from the anti-aircraft guns, from all we can tell. And all around us now we hear explosions, big explosions at great distances away from our location. As Secretary Weinberger was mentioning in his interview just now, Peter, they are not apparently, the Allies, the coalition forces are not targeting civilian targets apparently at all. And all the anti-aircraft fire, and we see more of it to the south right now, going straight up, seems to be very far from the center of town.
Well, right in front of me, John, to I guess the north, I see a series of surface-to-air missiles being fired up. They look like that to me. They're going straight in the sky. Who knows what they're aiming at? They're aimed at the attacking force, but there were about 5 were launched just within seconds of each other.
Yeah, just kind of boom, 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 boom.
They just went right up there, right into the sky.
Right, and it's we'll have to tell you again, and for our families who are listening to our broadcast now, all of this is happening very far away from where we are. It's nighttime, so everything is brightly illuminated, but you should know that for the present time anyway, we're safe, and all the action is very visible to us, but it's very far away from us. Bernie Shaw.
Oh, I'm just crawling around on the floor. I just checked the other side of the hotel, and it's a repetition of what we're seeing before our very eyes right now. More anti-aircraft fire, what appears to be giant sparklers flashing and then going dark, streams of tracer fire going up.
It's like one of these fireworks that has a bunch of, it says exploding balls on the side of it. They go up in the air one after the other.
And there's no doubt to me that those flashing silver lights are radar suppression devices just to mislead the radar-guided anti-aircraft guns that are shooting at the planes coming by, John.
Peter, let's go over to the other side of the hotel. We have a long extension.
Interrupting the gentleman in Baghdad, we're going now to Charles Jaco in Saudi Arabia. He's in Dhahran. Charles?
Just lost the line.
We hear the sirens and we can see you,
Hello.
Charles.
This is Charles Jaco in Saudi Arabia. Right now, the air raid sirens are going off again. We're being told to clear the area. The last time it was a drill. This time we're not sure if it is a drill or not, but everyone's being told to clear this area and get out of this area, get into the shelter in the basement of the area where we are. Right now, the only information we have that's updated is from the Saudi military, who say there was a mammoth airstrike against Iraq, and so far, at least until now, no trace of any retaliation from Iraq. This may be it. We don't know. The last time it was a drill, but the Saudi military says it's been a mammoth Allied airstrike against Iraq. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
All right, Charles, we do hear those precautionary sirens in the background. Let's return now to Baghdad. I'll remind you that at the Al Rashid Hotel there, a 14-story building, Bernard Shaw, Peter Arnett, John Holloman.
For Baghdad, well, I hesitate to say an air battle. There does not seem to have been any Iraqi aircraft fighters in the sky. We have seen no dogfights that could resemble anything like that. It looks like the Iraqi Air Force has not been able to get in the sky tonight. Maybe they were one of the first targets hit, Bernie.
And for our viewers, just to paint the picture for you where we are physically right now, we are in the hall on the floor, and we can look through open hotel doors to see either side. And it has suddenly fallen quiet again over the skies of Baghdad.
It has done so a dozen times in the last hour and a half, Bernie, and this lull is usually broken by more bombing. John?
That's right, Peter. Wave after wave of attack coming in here to downtown Baghdad. But we have so many correspondents arrayed around the globe at this hour. We would like to hear from more of them, so let some of them talk for a little while as we wait for the next wave of attack, which we'll do our best to bring to you. John Holloman with Bernie Shaw and Peter Arnett live in Baghdad.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much. We definitely will be back with you. Let's go now to the White House. The President of the United States is going to speak to the nation in a little more than a half an hour, and Charles Bierbauer.
Well, the President has been in the Oval Office throughout the evening. We're told that National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft is in the Situation Room here at the White House and keeping the President apprised. Also told that the President is able to have instantaneous communication, if he wants it, with General Schwarzkopf, who is the U.S. commander on the ground in Saudi Arabia. A couple of points. As we know, the President was watching television shortly before 7 o'clock. Officials say there was some concern about the attack being aired live on television, but the President, as he watched and heard the reports coming out of Baghdad, noted that things were moving right on schedule. That's when the announcement was made here. Marlon Fitzwater, in briefing reporters, was asked just what the objective is. Is it to get Saddam Hussein? Mr. Fitzwater spelled out the objectives this way, saying it is to get compliance with the UN resolutions and to free Kuwait. Although some officials here have indicated that indeed Saddam Hussein would certainly be at risk in a bombing attack on Baghdad. Again, the President working on that speech, actually a speech that he has been working on for a couple of weeks and that he has written pretty much himself. It'll last 10 to 12 minutes. One last point, Mr. Fitzwater asked if there's now relief here, said relief is not the word. The word is anticipation, that indeed there will be several days of hard work lying ahead. As you can hear, Mr. Bush will speak at 9:01. David?
Is a 901 hard start. Thank you.
Okay, Charles, thank you very much. We're going now to Richard Blystone in Jerusalem. We'll be back with you later. Richard.
It's going to be live. David, we have with us here in the CNN office in Jerusalem a high-ranking member of Israel's cabinet, Ehud Olmert, the Minister of Health. Let me ask you first, Mr. Olmert, was Israel informed of when this attack was going to take place?
Well, I was not entirely surprised that it took place tonight, that I can say.
Now, intelligence about the movements of Iraqi missiles and aircraft was of supreme importance to Israel in these last weeks. Can you talk about how you managed it with the United States?
Well, first of all, we have our own intelligence, which is not so bad, and we have tried as good as we could to find out exactly. And it is not a secret that we have very good and close relationships with America, and there was a constant flow of information throughout.
Now, your aircraft, Israeli jet aircraft, have been flying 24-hour cover around Israel's borders, a sky shield for several days now. Obviously, you weren't entirely confident that all of Iraq's missiles could be stopped.
Oh, no. In fact, right now, I'm not sure that they are entirely stopped. And as you know, we are on an alert situation. The Israelis were advised not to leave homes. And the gas masks are very close to everyone. I'm carrying one with me now. And we are not certain that it will not happen.
Now, as Minister of Health, you had an extra special interest in the missiles or bombers. At this point, you don't feel that the risk is entirely over?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, all our systems are ready. All the hospitals have been alerted, And we have bought special drugs in the last few weeks to make sure that in case there are some people wounded, we will know how to treat them, both for chemical weapons and for biological weapons. And the danger is not over yet. Everything can happen.
But what you had to be prepared for and what you really expected would be two different things. Can you tell us what kind of Iraqi response did you really expect? Did you expect it would be devastating?
Look, we know that they have ground-to-ground missiles which can reach Israel. We know that they have chemicals. We know that they have biological warheads. We know that for some time they have been threatening Israel to be the first target. In fact, they said it. Saddam Hussein said it, and Tariq Aziz said it very explicitly, that the first target for the Iraqi missiles will not be Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, but Israel. And we had to take it very seriously. So in fact, we have prepared ourselves for the worst possible scenario. We have prepared ourselves for a massive number of casualties, and we did everything possible in order to address ourselves to this. We bought lots of medicines. We have installed in every hospital in Israel detoxicating, purifying systems, so that if people will be hit, they will be washed and brought to treatment afterwards. And the whole country is ready and is very much aware of the danger.
Just one last question, Mr. Minister. How long is it going to be? What are you going to require as evidence before you stop carrying around your gas mask?
Well, I guess that when it's quite clear that Iraq is totally defeated and they are totally incapacitated by the American take, then I think we'll feel a lot more confident.
Ehud Olmert, Israeli Health Minister, thank you very much. Back to you, David.
Richard and Minister Olmert, thank you very much for that report from CNN Jerusalem. The last time we heard from Charles Jaco, he was heading for a bomb shelter at Dahran, and we will be back to him as soon as we can. There were sirens in the background, but no signs of any incoming anything. The United States and the UN allied forces have launched a massive air attack on Baghdad, Iraq tonight, wave after wave of planes coming over, but apparently doing pinpoint bombing, going after strategic targets and not saturation bombing. Let's switch now to the focus of much of the diplomatic negotiation that preceded tonight's action, and Jeannie Mose at the United Nations.
David, the members of the UN Security Council are expected to meet here at the UN for consultations on this sometime tonight. The Secretary General of the UN told us as much a short time ago on his way out of the building. We're not sure when. The U.S. mission to the United Nations is saying that probably sometime after the President of the United States speaks. In any case, the Secretary General of the UN was watching all of this on television. He left the building a short time ago saying he would be back soon. And here is some of what he said on his way out the door.
After all my efforts, after all the efforts of so many countries and so many personalities, that we are now facing a war. And then at this very moment, only 1 hour and a half after the hostilities, I am not well informed. I have not a lot of details about what has happened. But I think it's for me to express my deep sorrow because of as Secretary General of the United Nations, a peace organization, I can only be saddened by the beginning of hostilities.
The Secretary General saying he was saddened by hostilities. He also sounded a bit upset that he was not informed. He does not seem to be terribly informed in advance about this by the United States. As for action by the Council, we expect the United States to probably brief members of the Council on what it is doing. The ambassador from Cuba, which was one of the two countries that voted against the use of force resolution, as he left the building a few minutes ago, he said that Cuba would try to get the Council to do something to stop this war, although there's not much the Council can do. After all, it was the Council that authorized this action. And a CNN crew a short time ago went to the Iraqi mission to the UN to see what kind of response they would have at this early time in the hostilities. Someone merely closed the door on CNN people saying no, no, no. It was interesting, actually, when word of this started to come through here at the UN, filter out here at the UN. It wasn't confirmed. I happened to be near some of the Iraqi delegations, some of the lower level people that were sitting in the UN, and I told them what we had heard, that the hostilities were starting. They were serious, calm about it, and they simply at that point thought it probably wasn't true. Well, it is true. The Kuwaiti ambassador, by the way, welcomed the attack and said he wished victory to the U.S.-led operation. I'm Jeannie Mose reporting live from the United Nations.
Thank you, Jeannie. I might make note now for our viewers that we have temporarily lost contact with Baghdad. I don't wish to alarm anyone. We did expect to have this come in and out. But our three correspondents, Bernard Shaw, Peter Arnett, and John Holloman, are there in the Al Rashid Hotel. We expect to, and we hope to be bringing you some more of their reports later. The NATO foreign ministers have announced an emergency meeting at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. They will be meeting at their headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. That comes 1/2 hour after the meeting here in Washington with the nation on television of President Bush, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, addressing the United States on what has been called by United States officials Operation Desert Storm. Wave after wave of Allied planes attacking tonight the city and capital of Baghdad. Let's go now for an update to the Pentagon and Wolf Blitzer.
David, here at the Pentagon, we are broadcasting now from the CNN office at the Pentagon. They're getting the studio in the Pentagon ready for a briefing in about 1 hour, shortly after the President's address to the nation. They're getting it ready for a briefing by the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell. I want to reiterate what you said. The loss of communications, hopefully only temporarily, from Baghdad should not necessarily be a source of great alarm. For days, Pentagon officials have been telling us here at CNN that in this initial airstrike, once it happens, the U.S. will be zapping most of Iraq with so much electronic jamming equipment, so many electronic signals, that almost all of the communications, telephone, satellite, everything else, certainly television, almost everything is going to go out very, very quickly. It was a high priority target for the U.S. military, not necessarily to go after civilian targets, but to make sure that all of the command and communications facilities in and around Baghdad, certainly in Basra, in the south of Iraq, closer to Kuwait, all of that would be knocked out. The major reason being that the 540,000 Iraqi troops in and around Kuwait, what's called the Kuwaiti Theater, Kuwait and southern Iraq, that they would be isolated from command headquarters, from the bunkers where presumably Saddam Hussein personally is giving orders. So I just wanted to reiterate that we should not be overly alarmed by the loss of communications, and we should not be surprised if those communications with Baghdad are derailed, at least for the duration, at least for the time being. Let me also say that this airstrike is an airstrike. We have no indications that any U.S. land forces have actually moved in to liberate Kuwait. It has always been assumed that it would be several days, maybe even a week or two, could be longer, before any of those ground forces would be used. Certainly the initial reports reaching the Pentagon from CENTCOM, Central Command Headquarters in Riyadh, from General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of Operation Desert Shield, those initial reports appear to be very favorable as far as the U.S. is concerned. The orchestrated U.S. airstrike with all of the targets, the Scud missile bases, the anti-aircraft facilities, all of the Iraqi air bases, anything that could endanger the invading U.S. Air Force and the Navy fighters, all of that would be destroyed in this initial airstrike. David?
Wolf, thank you very much. It is 8:37 in the East. President Bush addresses the nation at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Just moments ago, the White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater described the president as calm, expectant, very matter of fact. He has been watching the first reports of the action which he initiated. We're going now to New York. The financial markets are reacting. Certainly there have been some jiggles in the oil markets. Bill Hartley reports now from New York.
Well, David, the outbreak of war is, of course, dominating world financial markets at this hour. Japan's stock market, though, down only very slightly in morning trading. Apparent relief that something has finally happened. Nikkei average is off just over 75 points. That's about 1/3 of a percentage point. Oil prices are rising right now on fears of what war will do to Middle Eastern fields, but spot traders say there are very few buyers or sellers. The quoted range is anywhere from $7 to $12 a barrel, higher than closing New York prices. That would put a barrel of light sweet crude just over the $40 mark. And the dollar is sinking against most major currencies, off 1 1/4 yen against the Japanese currency, falling about 2 pfennigs on the German mark and 1 1/4 cent on the British pound. We'll be following other markets in Asia and Europe through the night. David?
Bill Hartley reporting from the financial desk in New York. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to report that we can go back to Baghdad now and our 3 correspondents there. Let's see who picks up the phone.
Yes, this is Peter Arnett here. We're just temporarily off the air. There has been a lull for about 15, 20 minutes now. There has not been one tracer bullet in the sky. We don't see any more bombing in the distance, so for the time being anyway, it is quiet. I'll give you over to Bernie Shaw.
Thank you, Peter. Just to explain to our viewers why you did not hear from us for a nervously long time. For the past 20 minutes, I've been hiding under a table, and what happened was the security people made a sweep. They got very upset that there were 3 mortals on this floor, just 3 men standing in a hotel room. So I scampered to hide to make sure that if they pulled Arnett and Holloman out and took them downstairs into custody, at least there would still be one CNN person on the air. John?
I did the same thing you did, Bernie, only I hid under a bed, and it's amazing that somebody as large as I am can get under a bed that close to the ground, but I was able to do it at least. And the situation here now is, you know, the Iraqi authorities now know that we're here, and I don't know that they've been able to tell. I don't know whether there's satellite dishes that are tuned to CNN work in the blackout conditions.
I'm concerned that we not be summarily picked off one by one, so I'm going to yield the microphone to you, John, and to you, Peter, and I'm going to go back and hide under this table, not because I'm fearful of what's happening outside in the air, but I want to be sure that if there's another sweep, if you two get picked off, at least one of us will be here, and perhaps it might be a good idea to rotate this.
Sure, good idea, Bernie.
I'd like to assure our viewers the hotel security men were amiable. They let me stay. They understood. I explained that I didn't tell them we were reporting live from this hotel room, but I did say that we had been invited by the Minister of Information to witness what was going on here, and they accepted that explanation. 1 minute, please.
Mm-hmm. Here we go. I'm just looking out the window. The security people have forced us to close our windows, and maybe it's for our own good, maybe not. We don't know whether these windows are going to shatter under blasts or not, but there's some beautiful tracer fire outside now. It's way up in the air. It's bright red blasts and yellow blasts, and with the windows closed, we can't hear as well as we were able to hear before. But, you know, it continues to go on outside now. We don't, because we can't hear as well, we can't really tell you as much about what's going on as we would have been able to with the window open. These security fellows also took some of the videotape out of one of our cameras. They say we'll get it back tomorrow. I'm a little skeptical that we will, but it was the beautiful pictures that we took to go along with the commentary that you heard earlier tonight on CNN.
You keep using that word, beautiful. This is not beautiful to me. Peter, you were being modest when you told viewers, you explained that you had the permission of the Interior, the Information Ministry. Ladies and gentlemen, you should have heard this masterful performance. I was in the other room on the floor under the table, and this Peter Arnett man said to the security guy, I spent 10 years in Vietnam. The bombs outside, they don't bother me. If I go down in the shelter, I go crazy. It was quite a performance, and he conned him.
That's right.
All right, Bernie and Peter and John, we'll be back to you. Thanks for that report. We're going now to Charles Jaco, who has been reporting to us from Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Charles?
Yes, another false alarm, apparently. The air raid sirens went off here. We were led to believe it was some sort of air raid alert, either a missile alert or an air raid attack. We've stayed out here, losing phone lines, getting them back. What we can see is behind us, I don't know if you can see them, the lights of the city are on. It's rather unusual for a city that might be thought to be under attack, but the city is still brightly lit around the air bases here. There's no sign that the city is hunkered down or blacked out at all. Air raid sirens did sound. They sounded for a couple of minutes, then went off. Then the alarms here at the hotel went off, telling everyone to don their gas masks. All of us carry these now, and to get downstairs. Again, that it was apparently a false alarm. What we know, again, we can repeat, we heard earlier from Saudi military sources, which is that the first one was a false alarm. Apparently, this one was a false alarm. It was a national air raid alert. The last we heard from the Saudi military, and we say Saudi military because no information has been forthcoming here from U.S. military sources, is that the airstrikes against Iraq by Allied air forces, primarily the U.S. Air Force, have been massive, and they kept emphasizing that word, massive, and that they have detected no retaliation, either missile or jet, against Saudi Arabia from that. The Saudis are still obviously on pins and needles. They've been living in a state of high war alert since early August and are very understandably nervous and concerned about what might happen. But so far, everyone here in Tehran is safe, and there have been no problems except for bad cases of jangled nerves and scrambles down to the hotel basement into the shelter and putting on the gas mask. But all we can tell you right now is that apparently the attack was underway, it was massive, and so far at least, and this was our information as of about 20 minutes ago, so far no retaliation, either missile or jet of any kind from Iraq, has been spotted. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
All right, Charles, we'll switch just a few miles away and go to Riyadh, I believe, and Don Sweeney. We're expecting a report from him. Come in.
The military personnel in Saudi Arabia have just learned officially from their commander that they are in fact involved in Operation Desert Storm. A communique from General Norman Schwarzkopf issued just a few moments ago. Part of it says to the members of the military, you are a member of the most powerful force of our country in coalition with our allies that has ever assembled in a single theater to face such an aggressor. Now you have trained hard for this battle, and you are ready. He goes on to say a bit later, our cause is just. Now you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you, your loved ones at home, and our country. It's signed H. Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of the forces in Saudi Arabia. This is John Sweeney, CNN, in Riyadh.
All right, John, any extraneous noises outside where you are? Is everything fine?
We had one air raid warning about an hour and a half ago. We have not heard anything since then. The traffic in the streets is quite early in the morning here. It's 4:45 in the morning. The traffic in the street is quite normal, and other than that, things are quite quiet in Riyadh.
All right, thank you very much. And now a moniker that I hope doesn't stick. Let's go back to the boys in Baghdad.
Thank you, David. The boys in Baghdad are here, and we want to tell you a couple of things. There have been calls we've learned from CNN, from other networks, asking about the safety of their people. There are 45 journalists still in Baghdad tonight, according to the Minister of Information. And as far as we know, all those 45 journalists are in this hotel, and everybody in this hotel is safe. It hasn't been hit. There's a series of fallout, or not bomb shelters down in the basement, and virtually everybody except us is down there in those shelters. Bernie?
John, I made the trek downstairs into the bomb shelter and then came back upstairs, and indeed all the journalists who were in this hotel when it happened, and most of them were because there had been a series of staff meetings, they are safe downstairs in the bomb shelter. No one is being permitted outside the hotel. I know for a fact, CBS News, if you're wondering, I saw with my own two eyes Larry Doyle, and we go way back to our days at CBS in Washington. He's fine. I saw Alan Pizzi. He was sitting on the floor sipping a glass of something. He seemed quite content. And there's a young thin chap who said he worked for CBS. I think he does radio. He's fine. Everybody is safe. We know you're worried about us, and we're concerned about ourselves, but everybody is safe. Peter, you look like you want to say something.
I simply want to say, Bernie, that this lull has lasted about 25 minutes now. No aircraft fire, no bombing. So it looks like this first phase is over, and we'll get back to you when it all starts again.
Okay, thanks, Peter Arnett. John Holloman, you want to say anything before we throw it back to our colleagues?
I just want to look out the window one last time and make sure that it is as quiet as it seems to us. There are a few air bursts out here, but there's no anti-aircraft. I mean, there's nothing loud and noisy that we're hearing, and we don't feel any vibrations from outside. So I think it's probably safe for us to let the rest of the network broadcast a little bit tonight. From Baghdad, for Peter Arnett and Bernard Shaw, it's John Holloman. We'll be here if you need us.
Compelling reporting, gentlemen. Thank you very much. It's coming up on 5 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad, and behind that, not too far, will be light. President Bush is going to address the nation shortly, within 12 or 13 minutes, and the lull that they're talking about having lasted 25 minutes, may well continue until that is over. Also, we're expecting a briefing from the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell at the Pentagon following the President's remarks. Now let's go to Norfolk, Virginia. An awful lot of ships carrying the planes that were in the air over Baghdad sailed out of Norfolk. Tom Mentir is there with those who stayed behind and with this report.
There are 35,000 Navy servicemen that have departed from Norfolk for the Persian Gulf. We are at the First Baptist Church of Norfolk, where just a few moments ago, the Reverend here made the announcement to a packed congregation. There was a concert going on inside. Joining us is Colleen Jackson. Colleen, your husband, Kevin, is a lieutenant commander, and he is aboard the Saratoga. Tell me what thoughts went through your mind as the Reverend made the announcement. Did you think it would come tonight?
No, I didn't think it would come tonight, and I didn't think it would hit quite so hard. I knew that there were airplanes launched. I don't know if he's one of them. I'm scared. I can't think of a better place to have been tonight than to have been in church.
The church has a support system where they will contact everyone and make sure that people are not alone who are members of this church. Is it a good system? Does it help?
Yes, it does help, and I have my own support system of my friends from this church. They're making sure that no one will be alone tonight. They're making sure that everyone that needs to have a support, a shoulder to cry on, a friend to pray with. They're just the most wonderful people to be associated with right now.
Will you watch the president tonight?
Yes, I probably will, just to see if there's any information that I can find at all about what's happening with my husband and with the men in his squadron.
If you could talk to the president right now, what message would you send to him?
That I believe in him, that I'm praying for him, and to just bring our men home as quickly and safely as he possibly can.
Colleen Jackson, thank you very much. I know this is a very difficult time for you. Thank you. So it is one of the Navy wives, and there are 35,000 of them here in Norfolk, Virginia tonight. They're all waiting for some type of word. I'm Tom Mentir, CNN, reporting live from Norfolk, Virginia.
Thanks, Tom. They, too, are among the brave, of course, all across this nation. Let's return now to Baghdad and our three correspondents.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we're here, and it's very quiet outside. There still are an occasional flash of light off to the south of our location, far in the distance. There have been no big blasts in the recent past. No signs of anti-aircraft fire right now. No sounds of jets overhead. It's that eerie stillness that we talked about earlier in the day. Bernie Shaw is here now.
I just want to make this observation. The President of the United States is coming up to address his nation and the world very shortly. And that we are on the air means that the government of Iraq, its ears are wide open, and it will be listening to President Bush very closely. We told you earlier in the week that the Information Ministry had received its own satellite dish, and prior to that, the Foreign Ministry had its. We've got to run. Somebody's knocking on the door. John and I are going to hide. Peter, here.
Yes, this is Peter Arnett signing off for a minute, and I'll see what the action is outside.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We assume that's not the Fuller Brush salesman. Let's go to Robert Vito. He's standing by now on the west coast of the United States at San Diego, another important naval base. Robert.
Well, I'm at an apartment complex in San Diego, and I've spent the last few hours with several wives whose husbands are serving aboard ships in the Persian Gulf. And we've all been glued to the television set watching CNN, mesmerized by what we've seen and by what we've heard. And it's been an emotional time for these ladies as they held hands and they prayed and had these feelings that I'll let them tell you about. Denise, what was your feeling, your reaction as you watched the events unfold?
I was scared, frightened for my husband, for the guys on his ship, and for the Iraqi people, because it's come to this, you know. This crazy man has brought us this far. I back my husband up. I'm very proud of what he does and who he is and where he's at right now. But I'm also scared because I want him home.
If you had a moment to talk to the president, what would you say to him, the president of the United States?
To get it done and over with as quickly as possible. I'd like to see Saddam Hussein brought in front of the UN Council and tried. That's the way I feel about it. This man shouldn't be walking free. I think he ought to be tried for what he's done and what he's put the Iraqi people as well as the United States and all the countries that are over there through.
Thank you, Denise. Kay, could you just come up? Kay Hunter is a lady who a lot of the wives who have husbands on ships lean on for support and help. What are your feelings?
I am very, very deeply concerned for all the people over there. We have to be strong together because it's our strength and our support of one another that is going to get us through this. And it's because of this group here and lots of groups like this all over the United States with the parents and the wives and the children.
That map, how they would come in left to right.
Well, I think what we'll do is, as I say, attack by fire along the line, and the objective there is to keep the Iraqi forces pinned down so that they can't move and that they can't maneuver against us. I think we will at least feint and maybe carry through with an invasion on the coast by the Marines. Even the threat of that ties down some 5 Iraqi divisions. And then at the proper time when the enemy forces have been softened up as much as possible by fire, then I think probably to the west we'll see an armor thrust to pierce through their lines and get behind them and cut Kuwait off literally from Iraq itself.
What are our fears tonight about the Iraqi army? They've got a whole lot of tanks, and some of them pretty sophisticated Soviet tanks, correct?
Exactly so. Yeah, they have good. The T-72 is a good tank. It's not as good as the M1 Abrams, but it's a good tank, and they've got a lot of them.
But do we think that they can roll those tanks after this kind of an air attack?
And that's the critical point to understand. Air control is essential. Once we gain air control, and we certainly will gain air control, then their armored forces will be almost impossible for them to move. So that the air campaign and the ground campaign fits together.
That business about an air campaign, describe for us the kind of attack. What come from helicopters? The F-15 is not particularly effective, as I gather, against tanks on the ground. So it would be the new what? The new Apache helicopters and the old Cobras?
It'll be the Warthogs, of course, that are specifically designed as tank busters. The Apache helicopters with their Hellfire missile systems. But also, as we saw and we talked about a little bit yesterday, the B-52s used in a ground support role can be just devastating. That is, as we said yesterday, that whole divisions at Khartoum, for example, and Quezon just disappeared, and we can expect that kind of very massive bombing of the front lines at some stage in this air campaign.
All right, thanks very much. Colonel Harry Summers, who's been on the front lines himself, military strategist and instructor at the War College, and a guy who's been following all of this very carefully, describing the kind of training that these men received. When you talk to those people at the field command level in Saudi Arabia, colonels, majors, captains even, they said that they were in fact grateful that they had 5 months in the desert sands to get their troops ready. The troops quickly got eager to go home or to go forward, but the commanders were very happy to have that 5 months to adjust not only to the climate, but to work out their forces and their strategy in the desert sands. And they got used to the idea of sandstorms, colder desert nights at the end, living among camels, and now moving up north and waiting to see just how effective this airstrike will be. President Bush is expected in the White House at the Oval Office to talk to all of us, to address this nation tonight on Operation Desert Storm in about 4 minutes. NBC's John Cochran is one of our White House correspondents. He's been there all evening long. John, any additional word on what we can expect from the president?
Well, I do think we're going to hear him make some sort of overture to Saddam Hussein. Whether he's going to talk about when he's going to stop the attack, we just don't know. I'm told the president was still working on this after 8 p.m. That was, in other words, in the last hour. So there could be last-minute changes, possibly based on what reports he's getting back from his military people, Tom. We are told, incidentally, that he made the decision to order this attack at least 2 days ago. Now, of course, it was a tentative decision. If Saddam Hussein had in a substantial way started removing his people from Kuwait, the president could have stopped this machinery. But he made the basic decision about at least 2 days ago, and the reason I say at least 2 days ago, that's when some of his aides first learned about it. They don't know exactly when in his own head he decided, Tom.
John Cochran, we're going to go now back down to Washington, D.C., to the Capitol, I think. NBC's Andrea Mitchell with Senator David Boren, who's chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was brought into this process early on, and we're going to hear about what the targets were and how they were selected. Andrea?
He was briefed indeed as chairman of the Intelligence Committee by the CIA Director, William Webster. What targeting were you told about?
Andrea, I think obviously we want to knock out the command and control mechanism. The important thing is to decapitate the Iraqi military, to knock out the top leaders and their ability to communicate with their troops so they will feel deserted. The other important thing is to knock out the missile launch capability that could threaten other countries, our troops in Saudi Arabia, Israel, and other countries. That's extremely important, and also knocking out the chemical, nuclear, and biological warfare capability. I think we want to hear from the president. It's going to be interesting to see how successful we've been in severing this command and control network, because that will affect our ability of succeeding as this thing goes along. So that's extremely important. In my opinion, certainly they've picked the right targets. They're going at it the right way, and we just all hope and pray that this first strike will be a very successful one.
Well, stand by, Senator Boren. I know after the president speaks, we'll want to talk to you again about your assessment of his analysis. Tom?
Yeah, Andrea, very briefly, does the senator know whether the president will offer a pause for Saddam Hussein to now get out of Kuwait?
The question from Tom Brokaw is whether the president will now offer a pause for Saddam Hussein to get out of Kuwait.
I don't think we know that at all until we hear it from the president. I don't know. Either this is a massive strike that will be continuing on, or it is in the nature of something of a demonstration to Saddam to what he can expect. And I think we'll wait to have to hear from the president as to which course he's following at this point.
Okay, Tom, and the official notification in writing did go to the leaders under that declaration, the resolution from the joint session of Congress, and that official notification in writing came from the White House tonight here to Capitol Hill.
NBC's Andrea Mitchell, thanks very much. The Senate Intelligence Committee chairman is Senator David Boren, Democrat of Oklahoma, and he was briefed, as you heard, by the CIA on what is going on. Intelligence is crucial in all of this, and of course the Congress now has established this apparatus so that it too can be a piece, have a part in the decision-making process and be briefed along the way. But ultimately the decision rests with the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States. He did make the decision. We've been hearing that he made it 2 days ago. Today he decided to launch Desert Storm. It has now been underway for about 4 hours, and we're going to go to the Oval Office momentarily to hear from the President of the United States as he speaks to the country and what has been going on tonight in the name of everyone here.
Hear the President now.
All right, Charles, we go live to the Oval Office.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. This military action, taken in accord with United Nations resolutions and with the consent of the United States Congress, follows months of constant and virtually endless diplomatic activity on the part of the United Nations, the United States, and many, many other countries. Arab leaders sought what became known as an Arab solution, only to conclude that Saddam Hussein was unwilling to leave Kuwait. Others traveled to Baghdad in a variety of efforts to restore peace and justice. Our Secretary of State, James Baker, held an historic meeting in Geneva, only to be totally rebuffed. This past weekend, in a last-ditch effort, the Secretary General of the United Nations went to the Middle East with peace in his heart, his second such mission, and he came back from Baghdad with no progress at all in getting Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait. Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force, we will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal. Initial reports from General Schwarzkopf are that our operations are proceeding according to plan. Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities, and among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. While the world waited, Saddam sought to add to the chemical weapons arsenal he now possesses an infinitely more dangerous weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon. And while the world waited, while the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, to the entire world, including to our own economy. The United States, together with the United Nations, exhausted every means at our disposal to bring this crisis to a peaceful end. However, Saddam clearly felt that by stalling and threatening and defying the United Nations, he could weaken the forces arrayed against him. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein met every overture of peace with open contempt. While the world prayed for peace, Saddam prepared for war. I had hoped that when the United States Congress, in historic debate, took its resolute action, Saddam would realize he could not prevail and would move out of Kuwait in accord with the United Nations resolutions. He did not do that. Instead, he remained intransigent, certain that time was on his side. Saddam was warned over and over again to comply with the will of the United Nations, leave Kuwait or be driven out. Saddam has arrogantly rejected all warnings. Instead, he tried to make this a dispute between Iraq and the United States of America. Well, he failed. Tonight, 28 nations, countries from 5 continents, Europe and Asia, Africa and the Arab League, have forces in the Gulf area standing shoulder to shoulder against Saddam Hussein. These countries had hoped the use of force could be avoided. Regrettably, we now believe that only force will make him leave. Prior to ordering our forces into battle, I instructed our military commanders to take every necessary step to prevail as quickly as possible and with the greatest degree of protection possible for American and Allied servicemen and women. I've told the American people before that this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back. I'm hopeful that this fighting will not go on for long, and that casualties will be held to an absolute minimum. This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. We have no argument with the people of Iraq. Indeed, for the innocents caught in this conflict, I pray for their safety. Our goal is not the conquest of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait. It is my hope that somehow the Iraqi people can, even now, convince their dictator that he must lay down his arms, leave Kuwait, and let Iraq itself rejoin the family of peace-loving nations. Thomas Paine wrote many years ago, "These are the times that try men's souls." Those well-known words are so very true today. But even as planes of the multinational forces attack Iraq, I prefer to think of peace, not war. I am convinced not only that we will prevail, but that out of the horror of combat will come the recognition that no nation can stand against a world united. No nation will be permitted to brutally assault its neighbor. No president can easily commit our sons and daughters to war. They are the nation's finest. Ours is an all-volunteer force, magnificently trained, highly motivated. The troops know why they're there, and listen to what they say, for they've said it better than any president or prime minister ever could. Listen to Hollywood Huddleston, Marine Lance Corporal. He says, "Let's free these people so we can go home and be free again." And he's right. The terrible crimes and tortures committed by Saddam's henchmen against the innocent people of Kuwait are an affront to mankind and a challenge to the freedom of all. Listen to one of our great officers out there, Marine Lieutenant General Walter Boomer. He said, "There are things worth fighting for. A world in which brutality and lawlessness are allowed to go unchecked isn't the kind of world we're going to want to live in." Listen to Master Sergeant J.P. Kendall of the 82nd Airborne. "We're here for more than just the price of a gallon of gas. What we're doing is going to chart the future of the world for the next 100 years. It's better to deal with this guy now than 5 years from now." And finally, we should all sit up and listen to Jackie Jones, an Army lieutenant, when she says, "If we let him get away with this, who knows what's going to be next?" I've called upon Hollywood and Walter and JP and Jackie and all their courageous comrades in arms to do what must be done. Tonight, America and the world are deeply grateful to them and to their families. And let me say to everyone listening or watching tonight, when the troops we've sent in finish their work, I'm determined to bring them home as soon as possible. Tonight, as our forces fight, they and their families are in our prayers. May God bless each and every one of them and the coalition forces at our side in the Gulf, and may He continue to bless our nation, the United States of America.
President Bush, live from the Oval Office in a 12-minute address to the nation and the world, saying at the outset his minimal demands. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait and Iraq will comply with all relevant UN resolutions. Let's go now to Charles Jaco, who has word on airplanes in Saudi Arabia. Charles.
Yes, David. One high-ranking Saudi official has told us that he has been in touch with the highest levels in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. According to this information, he claims that all the planes from this first raid, Saudi and U.S. planes, have returned safely with no loss of planes and no loss of pilots. That's according to a high-ranking Saudi official here with contacts in Riyadh. King Fahd, the King of Saudi Arabia, is said to be meeting right now in Riyadh with members of his court and members of his government. I asked one Air Force officer here about the raid, how it went. Information was very hard to come by, but he would only tell me that the raid was, quote, more successful than we imagined, close quote. We can only imagine what that means. So the preliminary, and I must say these are preliminary indications we're getting here from a high-ranking Saudi official and an Air Force officer, is that the first wave of the raid on Iraq at least was successful, and that at least all the Saudi and United States planes have returned without any loss. David?
Saudi Arabia, thank you very much. The force may indeed be larger than we had been led to believe, and with word on that is our correspondent who covers world affairs for us, Ralph Begleiter. I'm sorry for that lapse. Ralph, what have you for us?
David, according to Saudi officials, the number of Saudi planes in the air tonight was 150, joining the American fighters. And according to the Saudis, the air attacks were much more extensive than merely Baghdad. We, of course, had our reporting only from Baghdad because of the limitations of coverage in Iraq. But according to these Saudi sources, the attacks were countrywide throughout Iraq. Involved in the mission tonight, along with British and American forces. The Saudi sources also say that Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar was here at the State Department this morning at 8 o'clock for a meeting with Secretary of State Baker, a very brief meeting, about 10 minutes long, during which Baker asked for the Saudi green light to go ahead with the attack today. Prince Bandar telephoned King Fahd from Baker's office itself, received the green light, gave it to Baker immediately. That was the prearranged signal that the United States and the Saudis had decided on in order to get the Saudi government on board for the attack. In fact, that was the language used by King Fahd. He said, "We are on board." In addition, we've learned that Israel was pre-notified of the attack as well through several channels. The Saudis here in the Soviets here in Washington say they were not informed through the embassy in Washington, but presume that direct channels between Washington and Moscow were utilized for pre-notification. David?
World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter, thank you very much, reporting live from the State Department. Everyone wants us to go back to Baghdad, and so do I, where Bernard Shaw, Peter Arnett, and John Holloman have been reporting this dramatic evening. Gentlemen.
This is Bernie. We have listened to the President's address, and as he indicated in speaking, or while speaking, hostilities were going on, and indeed, we could see far off in the distance lights flashing. We could hear the bombs, and we could see the tracer fire from the anti-aircraft batteries. As I listened to President Bush tonight, it seemed to me that he was telling Saddam Hussein, you are going to quit Kuwait. But I also heard Peter Arnett and John Holloman an implied threat to this man that the forces have gone against the nuclear plant that was a building. The forces have gone against the chemical arsenals. But I heard the president saying that we might not stop here. He did declare that this was not an invasion of Iraq. He wants to cripple this man's military capability. I should also tell you that we do not know where President Saddam Hussein is at this moment, nor do we know where other members of his government are located. I'm going to pass the microphone around because each of my colleagues has something to contribute. John Holloman.
Bernie, I think you're right about the President's message to President Saddam Hussein. It's a message of this is it. This is the beginning of what we're going to do. I'm sure the president would like it very much if President Hussein would respond right away by, offering to pull out of Kuwait or something, but we'll have to wait and see what he's going to do later on. The last time we saw President Saddam Hussein was on television tonight in video that we know was at least a day old from a tour that he made of Kuwait. Excuse me. I'm now looking out the window of our bureau here, and I can tell you that off in the distance there continues to be the sounds of what appear to me to be bombs. During the president's message, there were flashes of light from a distance probably as much as 15 or 20 miles away, probably to the south of where we are. And at this moment, there are no signs of anti-aircraft fire in the downtown Baghdad area, but there continue to be these flashes of light off in the distance to the south. Peter Arnett, your reflections.
Yes, John, I couldn't help thinking as I heard the bombs, the distant bombs, punctuating President Bush's speech, that his reference to Vietnam, this will not be another Vietnam. And I was thinking back to Vietnam, where I spent many years, to a similar raid in 1972, a B-52 strike on Hanoi. The interesting thing was that raid came at the end of the Vietnam War, near the end of the Vietnam War, and many say it helped end that war. This raid on Baghdad and elsewhere in this region tonight is at the beginning of this war, and maybe it certainly won't be a Vietnam. John?
Peter, while you were speaking, the sky lit up again with some more apparently chaff to fool Iraqi radar in the sky. There are bunches of groups of white lights and yellow lights that go through the sky and then blink out mysteriously, apparently designed to confuse the anti-aircraft guns. And at this point, the anti-aircraft guns are not firing, so if they're intended to confuse, they are not. The guns are not firing. Well, as I speak, off in the distance, I see some anti-aircraft fire is going up pretty far away from our location, and you might be able in the background to hear some of that out the window. Yeah, Bernie Shaw is back again, and then we want to talk to someone who's just come up from the shelters downstairs who will brief our loved ones about how things are there. Bernie.
Yes, I was just, Ingrid has been sitting here on the floor. I don't know how you managed to get past those guards and make that long hike up those 14 stories that I made about an hour ago. But what is the situation in the bomb shelter? And Ingrid, you know all of the members of the press corps, the other American networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, they've been highly concerned about their people. So take your time now and give us a fill on what the situation is in the bomb shelter.
Well, what you can see from up here, you can hear down in the shelter is low, very low and quiet thumps. There was a little bit of confusion at the beginning. The press went down there, other hotel guests, hotel employees who also live in a compound nearby. A number of mothers and their children at a certain time, perhaps half an hour after the attack started, you heard chants of down, down Bush, so we even had a little demonstration down in the shelter. The interesting thing was that some of the government guides that accompany us during the day when we try and work, and some of the hotel security people are walking around with Kalashnikovs and gas masks, which is something that was a little bit of a surprise to see. And I did see a lot of our colleagues down there, some of them who had been up on higher floors taking pictures, and they were taken by security people downstairs to a shelter, ostensibly for our own protection. Bernie?
And what is the mood of the people in the shelter?
Well, it's actually quieted down a lot. The confusion has ceased. Some of the people have gone to sleep. There's still a lot of milling around. The people are trying to get the BBC or anything to know what's going on in the outside world. There's a lot of questions about what's going on in Kuwait, Jordan, Israel, other spots that may be involved, and people are very curious to come above ground, waiting for daylight just to see what has happened.
Even in the midst of these raids around Baghdad, life goes on. And as incredible as it sounded incredible to my ears, John Holloman, a rooster crowing about 20 minutes ago as the bombs were going off out there over the horizon. Very strange sound.
I'll say, Bernie, and it's a long time before sunrise here. It's still a couple of hours before we're going to see the first rays of sunlight off to the east. But this rooster was obviously confused by all the military hardware arrayed and displayed in the skies of Baghdad. Peter Arnett standing by to talk to us some more, but I'm just going to look out the window once before I give the microphone to Peter. You can still see flashes in the sky, but still, strangely, eerily, there are no fires, which is an indication. President Bush said in his speech that they were not attacking civilian targets here. They were attacking specific military targets, and it appears that's correct from everything we can observe from our window.
Yes, thank you, John. By my watch in this dim light of this hotel room, this these series of raids have been going on for about 2 hours and 50 minutes. They began at around 2:30 Baghdad time in the center of the city. The government installations or installations of one kind or another, maybe anti-aircraft, strategic communication centers, began in the center and stayed in this particular part of town for about an hour and a half, but they are moving outwards of a large perimeter. All around the horizon, we see explosions. There must have been scores and scores of raids that we have witnessed so far. Witnessed, when I say we witnessed, we've seen the flashes and we have seen the anti-aircraft fire going up. But it's obvious that these raids are continuing, and we can see the evidence of that. Here's Bernie Shaw again.
Peter, I'm trying to clear my mind of everything to keep the chronology of events uppermost. And I am anticipating two things at daybreak. One is more a hope than an anticipation. We hope that, one, when it's safe to go outside, we can find somebody in authority in this government to talk to. We do not know where President Saddam Hussein is at this moment as these raids continue. The other thing I anticipate is that Saddam Hussein will be beseeched by friends, some of them, to quit Kuwait. And, of course, you have to assume that he's going to have his supporters who will say, fight on. But I can't wait for daybreak because we've got even more work to do, and it's going to be interesting to see whether we can find anybody responsible in this government here in Baghdad to respond not only to the attacks, but also to the address of the President of the United States. Peter?
Yes, indeed, Bernie. Now, President Saddam Hussein has made it clear in the past week that he almost welcomed this war and he was prepared to fight it. So as we see it continuing, we'll report back to Atlanta, but let me give you John Holloman first.
Now we're going to go back to Atlanta to see what else our other network correspondents have to tell us.
John, Peter, and Bernie, thank you very much. We'll certainly be back with you. It's not quite sunup yet in Baghdad. By the way, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, is reporting that 5 Iraqi Scud missiles have been fired on Saudi Arabia, and the French embassy in Riyadh confirms that at least 1 Scud missile was fired. Those are the first reports of effective or possibly effective retaliatory firing from Iraq outward. Well, we've just heard from the very interior of a bombed country, Iraq. Let's go now to the interior of the United States, the hometown of the late President Harry S. Whoops, we're switching our plans now to go to Charles Jaco in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, we've just been given a statement by General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of the U.S. Central Command and the head of Operation Desert Storm, to the troops. I'll read part of it very briefly. This morning at 0300 Saudi time, we launched Operation Desert Storm, an offensive campaign that will enforce the UN resolutions. And this is directed to the troops, all the troops, especially the U.S. troops. During my visits with you, I have seen in your eyes a fire of determination to get this job done quickly so we all may return to the shores of our great nation. My confidence in you is total. Our cause is just. Now you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you. Signed, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Central Command. The indications we're getting so far are that the operation to this early date is working fairly well. David?
Tonight we know why they call him Stormin' Norman. Thank you for that. We've just been in the heartland of Iraq with our 3 fine correspondents there. Let's go to the heartland of America now, the hometown of the late Harry Truman, where Jeff Flock is standing by.
David, Middle America is tonight glued to the reportage from the Middle East. Let's get first reaction now to the first retaliation, reports of the first retaliation. This gentleman's son is on a Navy destroyer. Sir?
Well, I think he left us with some assurity that they have made decisions based on a lot of good facts, and Congress and him have, we've engaged, and I think the greatest thing I heard is that he's going to allow us to go in there and do battle.
All right. Other reaction. Sir, your first reaction?
I feel like the president's speech was good. This is no Vietnam, and it's not going to be. And I back the president and the troops 100%.
Before we get away, a young person, what you saw, what do you think of it?
I don't think it's good, and I don't think we should go to war over just some stupid oil.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No.
Middle America, Independence, Missouri. We'll be back with more reaction later. I'm Jeff Flock, CNN, reporting live.
Jeff, thank you very much. It's coming up on the time when Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney is going to address reporters at the Pentagon, fill in a little more of the detail of what is going on and the scope and the size of the forces which have attacked Iraq tonight. We'll also hear from General Colin Powell. Wolf, you're standing by there now. Anything since the last time we talked?
David, here at the Pentagon, there is a packed studio here, obviously anticipating a lot of military details about this operation from Defense Secretary Dick Cheney. He is expected any moment now to walk in here and to provide us these details. The President did provide some initial accounts. Obviously, as we all recall, he was very upbeat, at least in the initial reports from General Norman Schwarzkopf about this operation. He made it clear that this is so far an air campaign, that ground forces have not yet been ordered into Kuwait, into Kuwait in order to liberate that country. That has always been anticipated. The initial game plan was always that the United States would try to achieve air superiority as quickly as possible, and only after several days, maybe even a week or two, bring in the Army and the Marines and actually go in, and what Pentagon planners have always hoped would be a mop-up operation. They had always hoped that the Iraqis would surrender after this massive U.S. And allied airstrike. Only earlier today, military officials in Riyadh, U.S. military officials, said that the United States now has over 1,700 combat aircraft in the theater. Obviously, they had been rehearsing for many weeks and months, getting ready for this operation, pinpointing as many of the strategic targets as possible, trying to destroy them in the initial hour or two. The sense at the Pentagon has always been that this war would be won within an hour or two if the U.S. and the allied air powers managed to achieve that decisive air superiority. We're also told that about a month ago, when the President met with his military and political advisors at Camp David, he had basically indicated to them to get ready for this operation, that if there was no diplomatic progress, if Saddam Hussein by January 15th was saying that he was not going to leave Kuwait, that the United States, within a day or two, maybe three, would begin the operation, and clearly the President has decided that this is the moment to do it. Again, we're awaiting Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, who is going to be providing us with the initial reports from General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of Operation Desert Sword. David?
All right, thank you very much, Wolf. Let's go back to the White House now and Charles Bierbauer in the aftermath of the President's about 12-minute talk. Charles.
David, President Bush has laid out the objective of freeing Kuwait, but very early on, back in August, he said one other thing that has to be considered is the long-term security arrangement in the Persian Gulf area. Just how he is going to go about that was to go after the nuclear and chemical weapons, and we'll hear more about that from the Pentagon briefing.
And then there'll be both Cheney and General Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will take just a very few questions. As I'm sure you can understand, they're very busy. So they will have time to take just a few questions, and then they will be on their way. So with that, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you all heard the speech a short time ago by the President. And while there is not a great deal we can add now, we did want to be as forthcoming as we can with you. At 7 o'clock tonight, as you all know by now, Eastern Time, 3 o'clock Thursday morning in the Gulf, the armed forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the President to force Saddam Hussein to withdraw his troops from Kuwait and to end his occupation of that country. At the direction of the President, I signed the execute order yesterday afternoon to undertake this operation, subject to certain conditions. It was to begin only after we'd met the terms of the resolution passed last Saturday by the Congress. Those conditions have been complied with and proper notice has been given as required. And the operation was not to take place if there had been any last-minute diplomatic breakthroughs. The operation underway tonight, taking place in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, involves allied air forces of 4 nations: the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. As they undertake their missions, they do so after months of careful planning. At the direction of the President, great care has been taken to focus on military targets, to minimize U.S. casualties, and to do everything possible to avoid injury to civilians in Iraq and Kuwait. The targets being struck tonight are located throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Our focus is on the destruction of Saddam Hussein's offensive military capabilities, the very capabilities that he used to seize control of Kuwait and that make him a continuing threat to the nations of the Middle East. These are the same capabilities that now threaten American and Allied forces in the Gulf. Our goal, the same one we have maintained throughout Operation Desert Shield, is to liberate Kuwait and enforce the resolutions of the UN Security Council. This portion of the campaign, directed against Saddam Hussein's offensive military force, is an enormously complex undertaking. It involves all of the services of the United States military and hundreds of U.S. and Allied aircraft. It is an ongoing operation, and we must therefore limit the kind and the amount of information that we provide in these early stages. This obviously is different from what happened in Panama in December of 1989, where most of the operation was over by the morning of the first day. We understand your need for information about what will happen next, and we are well aware of our obligation to keep the American people informed. But you must also understand that we cannot talk about future operations without putting at risk the safety of those who will have to carry them out. I believe I can speak for all of us at the Pentagon tonight when I say that we had hoped to settle this matter peacefully. This has clearly been an agonizing decision for the President and the Congress of the United States. And we've reached the point of committing our forces to battle very reluctantly, only after the most careful consideration. But no one should doubt our ability and our resolve to carry out our mission and to achieve our objective. I have great confidence in the professionalism, the dedication, and the determination of the men and women of our armed forces. They are, without question, the finest young sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines this nation has ever sent in harm's way. I want to assure all Americans that we will do our very best to carry out the President's orders as quickly and efficiently as possible and at the lowest cost possible. We'd be happy to respond to a few questions.
General Powell, can you describe the Iraqi Air Force's resistance, if any, their losses so far, and to what extent do you think that you've already achieved air superiority there?
Well, the operation's only 2.5 hours old, so I'm not quite prepared to take on your second question. So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
Has there been any Iraqi response of any kind? What can you tell us about the Scud missiles that have been reportedly launched by Iraq?
There have been a number of reports of Scud missiles, but insofar as I am aware, they basically are false reports. General Powell may want to say that.
Can you give us a rundown on the types of aircrafts and numbers that were involved in the raids?
I really can't at this time because it is an ongoing operation. Let me just say that it involved the Air Forces mentioned by Secretary Cheney and sorties in the hundreds.
Can you tell us were there cruise missiles involved with that?
I won't comment on specific weaponry. It's an ongoing operation.
What targets were we bombing near Baghdad, and have we bombed any facilities where we think Saddam Hussein might be?
We have not been targeting Mr. Saddam Hussein. The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces. And we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
Have you heard any Iraq response of any kind?
The response of the Iraqi forces at this point has been limited, I think would be the best way to characterize it. But again, let me emphasize, as General Powell did, we're in the very early stages of this operation. It is likely to run for a long period of time. I realize you've all got legitimate questions about it, but there simply are things we do not know yet because it is an ongoing operation, because pilots are just now returning, and there'll be a lot of work required to assess the success of the initial efforts, and there will be a lot of follow-up work required as well.
Could you tell us, please, whether or not there have been any indications whatsoever that the Iraqi troops, the 540,000 Iraqi troops in the Kuwaiti theater, have been cut off from their command and control headquarters in Baghdad?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that at this point, Wolf.
What about, Mr. Secretary, can I follow up, please? Should I follow up? The President said this was strictly an air operation for the time being. When does the U.S. decide to send in the ground forces?
It is strictly an air operation for the time being, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the point at which additional forces might be engaged.
Have your targets tonight there with any Navy planes?
Rock said on the McNeil Larry News Hour this evening that we are, quote, now prisoners of our own country, in our own country. Now that we've defended ourselves from naked aggression in the Middle East, how do we defend ourselves here at home from terrorist attacks?
I'm confident that we can deal with the terrorist threat.
Have our targets thus far included tanks and artillery?
I don't want to get into specific target sets yet. As the information comes in and builds over time, and we can give it to you historically, we will give it out, but I'm not prepared to go into specific target sets and what targets have been hit and have not, because it really is just too early to give you that kind of bomb damage assessment.
If Saddam Hussein says tomorrow, I give up, I'm sorry, I will withdraw from Kuwait, will you have a pause in your air campaign, or will you continue with it until you knock out all the priority targets?
I will do whatever the President of the United States directs us to do through the Secretary of Defense.
Secretary Cheney, from a military perspective, what went into your thinking in deciding to launch the attack at this point this evening? What were the factors?
Well, I think there were several factors. Of course, the President made the basic decision to commit the force. It was affected by, among other things, the expiration of the United Nations deadline that had been set on November 30th when the Security Council voted for the use of any means necessary to get him out. I think it was affected in part as a result of consultation with our allies, but it also was based upon the advice of our senior military commanders in terms of picking a time when conditions appeared to be most favorable for undertaking the operation. Let me emphasize, though, that the procedure we went through was to plan for execution of the operation at a point after the expiration of the United Nations deadline, but I had no authority to execute the plan until the President instructed me yesterday afternoon to do so, and it was at that point that we signed out the execute order with the qualifiers I mentioned in my opening statement.
Those favorable factors, can you tell us what some of those were?
I think I just leave it where it is.
Are you surprised that there was no response, or a very small response from the Iraqi forces at this point?
Again, I'm reluctant to characterize the response beyond what we've already said about it. We've not had an opportunity to debrief our pilots yet. Some of them are still flying missions, and I think it would be inappropriate at this point to convey the notion that somehow we've got a final fix on it. But I think it would be fair to say, and General Powell may well want to comment on this, that the initial reaction from the Iraqis is such that I'm generally of the opinion that we achieved a fairly high degree of tactical surprise.
Has there been any U.S. Israel or Turkey on the part of Iraq?
None to my knowledge.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us, the President mentioned that one of the objectives was to take out chemical and nuclear sites. Can you tell us in a general way if that mission was accomplished?
I can say that we have, in fact, gone after those targets. I do not yet have information on the effectiveness of those efforts.
Mr. Secretary, what about word of casualties at Baghdad? You indicated you wanted to spare civilians there. Do you have any sense about how that may or may not have occurred in the city? There was a lot of bombing, obviously, in Baghdad.
The best reporting that I've seen on what transpired in Baghdad was on CNN. And it would appear, based upon the comments that were coming in from the CNN crew in the hotel in Baghdad, that the operation was successful in striking targets with a high degree of precision. At least that's the reporting according to CNN.
Was there an Iraqi attempt? To launch missiles, sir?
We've had reports of missile launches, but none of them have been confirmed.
What about the Scuds in western Iraq at those air bases on the border? Have you got any reading on that? Are those fairly high priority targets?
Yes, they are a fairly high priority target.
And how'd you do?
I'm not prepared to say how we did or what we've done so far.
A follow-up on that. At the end of this operation, this phase of the operation, when you get a little better picture, and could you come back or have one of your staff come back and give us a briefing on it?
You'll be getting regular briefings, and we'll be, as the Secretary said, we're going to be as forthcoming as we possibly can, while at the same time preserving operational security.
Are you confident that your targeting of command and control sites has left Saddam Hussein the ability to, number one, know what's happening to his forces, and number two, to communicate to you that he wants to quit if he does decide so?
Again, Melissa, I don't have any information at this point on the overall effectiveness of the operation. What I said was the preliminary reports are very positive, but we are in the very earliest stages of this, and therefore there's not a lot of detailed information we can give you on what the effect of the bombing campaign has been on specific strategic categories of targets.
Is there a Navy aircraft participate?
Pardon?
Is there a military commander like Saddam Hussein still alive to surrender if there is such a decision?
I really don't have anything I can give you on board.
Saudis go.
Did you know where Saddam was? Did you know where Saddam was when the attacks began, and was that a target even though he was not the target?
We have not been tracking Mr. Saddam Hussein for the purpose of targeting him.
General, can you characterize in any general way how long the current beginning phase of this operation will continue? That is, the air operation will be the rest of I guess, tonight and tomorrow morning, or throughout tomorrow? Give people any kind of general idea how long this first phase will...
The air part of the campaign will continue until the whole campaign is completed. It doesn't end.
Do you believe the threat of a missile attack by the Iraqis has been eliminated at this point?
I cannot answer that at this time until we get some assessments in.
Damage to any oil facilities at all?
I don't have bomb damage assessment yet. I can't answer that question.
General, how massive is this first wave? Are we talking 500 missions, 1,000 missions tonight?
I think tomorrow we'll be in a better position to try to give you a handle on that, but this early in the operation, I'm reluctant to give those numbers out until I've had a chance to talk to General Schwarzkopf in greater detail.
General Powell, when you say hundreds of sorties...
All U.S. services were involved in this part of the campaign.
When you say, General Powell, that there were hundreds of sorties, does that mean that there were not more than 1,000?
I think I'll leave it at that, between a bread box or something else, hundreds of sorties. Thank you all. Thank you.
Hey, why don't we get next up?
The Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, leaving a briefing where they had to leave a lot of questions unanswered on Operation Desert Storm, but the one message they did want to convey was that it's likely to run for a very long period of time. In the words of the Secretary, when asked about air power and when the bombing might stop, he said, "It doesn't end." I would like to thank all my colleagues who've sat in with me for this segment of the broadcast on a very historic night, and end my portion here in Washington with thanks to them and thanks to you. As we go now to Atlanta and Lou Waters and Catherine Cryer. I'm David French in Washington.
Thank you, David. We've certainly been following your reporting throughout the evening. Now, I'd like to, at this point, go over some of the things that Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney had to say. We've been listening to his remarks. He apparently received authorization from President Bush yesterday afternoon to sign the order authorizing military action against Iraq. That military action began some 19 hours after the passage of the UN resolution deadline date. Secretary Cheney clarified the goals of this military operation. A surgical airstrike, as expected and anticipated, would be against military targets, specifically command and control targets, those targets that could damage incoming U.S. and international coalition aircraft, apparently which included British and Saudi Arabian aircraft in that initial bombing run into Baghdad and throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Also to protect Iraqi citizens and minimize civilian casualties as the airstrikes attempted to destroy Iraq's offensive military capabilities throughout Iraq and Kuwait. He stressed that the operation thus far was deemed very successful. Of course, information from the Secretary and General Powell is necessarily limited according to the ongoing nature of this military operation, but we have correspondents standing by across the United States and throughout the Gulf region to continue our updates on events as they unfold. Luke?
We did learn that 4 nations were involved in the air operation tonight, the USA and the UK, as Catherine reported. Also Saudi Arabia and 150 planes of the Kuwaiti Air Force were involved. We have been taking a slight check here of strategic targets in Iraq, many of which are in the Baghdad area, which we have been reporting on throughout the early evening. We note that there are at least 2 nuclear facilities, 2 biological, 3 missile-producing facilities, and 5 chemical facilities. This comes from a list of strategic targets that's available to us, I would imagine, in addition to the command and control targets in the Baghdad area. There may be many more sites that were hit tonight, but we must stress the fact that we're only getting a small part of the information because this was an operation in all of Kuwait and all of Iraq. Now, Wolf Blitzer, who was at that Pentagon news briefing, is joining us from the Pentagon. Many questions went begging. Wolf.
Well, Lou, the Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs clearly want to avoid providing too much operational detail, anything that could yet help the Iraqis in this initial air wave, this initial air assault. But clearly, by the tone of what they said, earlier hinted by the President, the United States is obviously very pleased by the initial reports coming from the Central Command in Riyadh. The U.S. targets appear to have been met, clearly the most important ones being the Scud missile batteries. In fact, Defense Secretary Cheney said that while there have been reports that the Iraqis have managed to fire some of their Scuds, the United States cannot confirm those reports. Indeed, the initial indications are that the U.S. fighter aircraft, the bombers, probably destroyed almost all of those strategic targets in Iraq within a matter of minutes, certainly within the first hour or 2 of what was certainly a very coordinated, polished U.S. airstrike, one that the United States has been rehearsing now for many months. The indications also are, of course, from these initial reports that those Scud missile bases in the western part of Iraq, what the U.S. calls H2 and H3, almost certainly have been destroyed. Those were the ones that endangered Israel. Those were the ones that could have reached Israel. And Saddam Hussein and his aides had repeatedly suggested over these past several weeks that their first target, if there was a war, would be to go after Israel. And from the initial reports, based on what we just heard, there were no missile attacks at the Israelis. Certainly, the U.S. planners here at the Pentagon are pleased. We're not going to be getting a whole lot more detail, we're told, until another briefing tomorrow. But certainly there are enough officials here who are getting indications about what exactly is going on. We'll be following that, of course. We'll be trying to report as much as we can in the course of this long and historic evening. Lou?
All right, Wolf Blitzer, who remains at his post at the Pentagon, will be back to you. Catherine.
Now let's return to the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad and CNN's Bernie Shaw. Bernie?
This is CNN Baghdad, checking for continuity with Atlanta.
We hear you, Bernie.
You're on the air, Bernie.
We are still crouching on the floor here in Baghdad in our bureau. It is very quiet right now. It's almost 6 o'clock in the morning. It is still relatively dark, John Holloman, and it sounds to me that 1 or 2 vehicles of some kind are going past the hotel.
Yes, I looked out the window just a moment ago, Bernie. I saw a taxi cab out on the street. That's talk about somebody with enterprise. That driver, if he's trying to pick up a fare, is certainly enterprising. You don't see any signs of people, but it is, of course, still dark. And this time yesterday morning, there was a thick early morning fog over the city of Baghdad. This morning, the fog is not that visible, and what is still visible out there is some smoke out on the horizon from some of these bombs that came through here several hours ago now.
And we should tell our viewers that we are anxiously awaiting daybreak so we can regroup and see where we go from here. As President Bush addressed the nation and the world, he indicated at the beginning of his remarks that the operations were underway as he spoke, And indeed, a few minutes into his address, off the horizon, we could see and hear the effects of still another bombing run.
I guess, Bernie, all in all, there might have been 7 or 8 different waves of these. The first one came about 3 o'clock in the morning our time. I had just gotten under the covers and was planning to sleep for a few hours before coming in at 6 in the morning about this time to relieve you from the overnight shift. And obviously we were both rudely awakened by what happened outside our windows.
Well, and to continue on this thought, John, at the time of the attack, if you're wondering how we were able to get the word to you, and right now let me apologize to anybody in Atlanta or the engineers or what have you, and to our viewers. Clearly, when I looked up and saw what was going on, the first instinct was to report the information, to get it on the air. CNN President Tom Johnson was arranging an interview on the telephone, and I apologize for screaming at anybody at headquarters in Atlanta, but I wanted to get your attention. And then the network came up to us, came to Baghdad, and we sought to describe what we were seeing, hearing, and feeling. And then I rushed down to the bomb shelter to make certain that I knew where it was. And when I was worried down there, wondering, does the world know what's going on? And I'm told that indeed the world did know what was going on because they could hear the reports. We're composed and organized now as much as you can be when a city is under attack or certain targets are under attack. And right now, there's this eerie stillness in Baghdad. John?
Also, Bernie, we should let our viewers know that we're in the dark pretty much. The hotel has no electricity. The way we were able to speak to you is we have some battery-powered equipment. Luckily, it'll work if you plug it into the wall and plug it into a battery, and it's now plugged into batteries, which we're able to scramble and find in the dark. And we think our batteries will last a while longer, so we'll be able to continue this report. And it's possible, I suppose, that by sunup, the officials in Baghdad might turn the lights back on, so we might be able to recharge our batteries and go out on the streets and do the job that we came here to do, which is show you the pictures of this place.
We do not know where President Saddam Hussein is, nor do we know the whereabouts of his key advisors. We are hoping sometime later today to hear from the government, to hear what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their reaction is to the series of bombing raids on strategic targets during the night. Let me pause for a moment to see whether our colleagues want to go elsewhere with our continuing coverage of what's happening in the Gulf.
We'll be back with you. At this point, let's go to Lou now. Lou?
And I'm going to check it right over to the White House where Charles Bierbauer is standing by.
President Bush has told us repeatedly that he did not think Saddam Hussein was getting the message about what was arrayed against him. The president tried to send a letter to Saddam Hussein. He sent his Secretary of State, James Baker, to Geneva with that letter. This is the one that the Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz refused to accept. The letter basically said to Saddam Hussein, if you do not withdraw, I am going to level your military capacity. I am going to attack your military ability to wage virtually any kind of war. That's a paraphrase, but beyond that paraphrase, George Bush has now sent a much more distinct message to Saddam Hussein. And we got the first inkling of just how massive this was in the president's speech when he said that he's taking out the tanks, but he also said he's going at the chemical facilities, the nuclear facilities. He is dealing with not only Saddam Hussein's ability to occupy Kuwait, but also his ability to wage further war at any point in the future. This is what George Bush was talking about when he said not only is the objective to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, but to guarantee some sort of regional stability arrangement that gets beyond this situation. There was considerable concern about Saddam Hussein being at some point, maybe it's months, maybe it's years from having a nuclear capacity. But what Mr. Bush has done tonight in describing this kind of a military attack on Iraq is to also describe what he is trying to do in terms of rendering Saddam Hussein incapable of waging war for quite some time to come. And the second message in this attack is the message, or at least in the president's words, was his message to the Iraqi people. He said to the Iraqi people, perhaps you can convince Saddam Hussein to end this now. Lou?
Yes, Charles, I was wondering about that. What kind of a signal is he sending to Iraq by making a statement like that?
Well, It will have to get there somewhat indirectly, but he has done this before. He has said that he hoped that the Iraqi people would have some ability to convey to Saddam Hussein that they didn't want a war. You could, I suppose, in the extreme, say that he's fomenting an insurrection against them. There had been certainly tacit hopes here at the White House among the Bush administration that someone would oust Saddam Hussein, but the signals that were given out verbally were ineffective, and perhaps no one is of that sufficient strength. Now he would hope that the people of Iraq might in some way, shape, or form say to Saddam Hussein, enough is enough. This is as strong a message as George Bush can probably send.
All right, Charles Bierbauer at the White House. Catherine.
Of course, people across the United States are watching and waiting. Let's go now to John Zarrella, who's standing by at Shaw Air Force Base. John?
Catherine, we are just down the street, actually, from Shaw Air Force Base, not too far away, right, Lee? And I'm with Lee Esmonde, and her daughter Shannon, and Kitty here sleeping. And Lee's husband Bill is in Saudi Arabia, and he's been over there since August. He's an air traffic controller, so there's a possibility that tonight he may very well have been directing some of the attacks that were going on against Saddam Hussein. And we've been talking while sitting here watching the president since about 8:30 tonight. And Lee, what did you think first of what the president said, and then, of course, what Secretary Cheney said about what's been going on?
Well, I was very impressed with the president speaking, and I believe that everything is systems go, if you will. Things are running smoothly, on schedule. We are achieving our goals as we had set out to do as a result of the failure of diplomatic solutions to come about.
You think then, from talking to you earlier, that the president has taken the right course of action?
Absolutely. I think this has been going on long enough. We have had, the coalition has been doing their best to achieve some sort of a solution to this situation, and nobody seems to have been effective when it comes to Saddam Hussein.
You seem so strong through all of this. How do you manage?
Oh, bless your heart. I guess since Bill's been away for several months, it's sort of seasoning. But with what's going on now, I am very, I hate to say this, but I'm glad that this has occurred. Not only the sooner it gets started, possibly the sooner Saddam will realize that we mean business, and rather than annihilate his country, we can come to a solution prior to going to that last step.
What are your feelings tonight as far as, you haven't gotten much sleep, though, in the last couple of days, and as far as your husband and where he is and what the troops and all the people are going through right now?
Well, from what I get from Bill, the morale is high, although the waiting can get too great on the nerves. And I spoke with some wives today, and they said that the people that are over there that used to be best of friends are now starting to squabble with one another, even under the best of conditions. I guess living in close quarters like that, that can occur.
What do you tell Shannon about all this, about what her daddy's doing over there and the job that he's performing, the service for his country? How do you put it to her?
Well, I try to be as honest and as upfront as I can. Sometimes you just have to say the truth regardless of the outcome. When it comes to kids, you can only shield them so much. She knows that her daddy runs the risk of not coming back home, but she also knows that what he is doing is vital and it is necessary, and that is what he has trained 15 years to do. And we're patriotic in this family, and we believe that what is going on now is unnecessary.
Lee, thank you very much for letting us invade your privacy at what is probably a very private moment for you and your family.
Actually, I'm proud that I could voice my opinions.
Thank you, Lee, again. And we will stay with you throughout the night. This is John Zarrella reporting live near Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina.
One of the countries in the Middle East dramatically caught in this crisis, of course, is Jordan, caught literally between Iraq and Israel. We're waiting for a reaction from there. Now on the line from Amman, Jordan, CNN's Margaret Lowry. Margaret.
Well, there have been some reports earlier tonight. We understand that the U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan was being evacuated. We have been on the phone with a spokesman for the U.S. Embassy who flatly denies this. He says there are no evacuation plans for the embassy at this time. In fact, the State Department ordered out non-essential diplomats and dependents of U.S. government workers about 2 weeks ago. And the feeling here is that pretty much everyone who was going to leave is gone. They have reduced the staff at the embassy considerably, but they won't give any figures.
Any special civil defense precautions being taken there, Margaret?
Well, the Jordanians have been in a pretty low-key state of readiness. There have been various films on television to show people what to do should there be trouble here. But Jordan has repeatedly stressed that it is not a combatant in this conflict, that it is in between Iraq and Israel, but it is not a party to this, and it hopes that it will be able to stay neutral.
Do you have a feeling of being safe in Amman, Jordan tonight? Morning for you.
As of this hour, the city is pretty much still asleep, and the word is not really out about what has happened in Baghdad. So I think at the moment we all feel everything is pretty calm here. Who knows what daylight will bring.
All right, Margaret Lowry in Amman, Jordan, where it's about 6 a.m. Catherine.
And of course, bordering Jordan and specifically threatened by Saddam Hussein, the nation of Israel. Let's go now to Richard Blystone standing by in Jerusalem. Richard?
Catherine, an Israeli army spokesman has been on television just recently to tell a little bit about U.S. bombing raids against missile sites in western Iraq aimed at Israel. He said, "We know of hits, and the danger," he said, "to Israel is diminishing." Those were his words. He said he refused to give more details, but it was more than we got out of the Pentagon. This spokesman said, "We hope he got a lot of them." Iraq was believed to have perhaps a couple of dozen missiles in position to fire at Israel. It has something like 60-odd launchers and a couple of hundred missiles in around the country, but not all of those were able to hit Israel, and it is thought that he would have been able to get only a few through in any case. But if the quiet here is any indication, the Army spokesman's wishes came true. CNN correspondent Richard Roth in Tel Aviv, which was Saddam Hussein's promised main target in Israel if it came to hostilities, he reports that it's all quiet there, and certainly it is as quiet here as could be expected. This is a great relief to Israel and to the United States in more ways than one, militarily and politically, because if Israel had been drawn into the war, it would have endangered the participation of the Arab members of the coalition. Israel promised the United States it would not strike first, would not mount a preventive strike against the missiles in western Iraq, which are about 300 miles from Jerusalem here. And the Israelis said yesterday they had had no promise of early warning from the United States, although they do have some reconnaissance and intelligence capability of their own in this regard, they said. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir is said that he had, according to a spokesman, had about an hour's warning of the raids which were undertaken in what was the early morning hours here. The health minister was in CNN's office here recently and said, despite the apparent success of the campaign so far, he is still carrying his gas mask and will until he knows that Saddam Hussein is finished. I haven't opened my gas mask yet, and I just hope that I won't have to. Catherine?
Thank you, Richard Blystone in Jerusalem. Lou?
We are now going to switch to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where many of the planes launched in these early raids of the operation were from. Charles Jaco is there. Charles, what have you got for us?
Well, it's very quiet here right now, but I'm here with Khalid Al-Maina, who is the editor of the Arab News, the largest publication in Saudi Arabia. Sir, thank you very much for taking some time to spend with us. Your reaction very briefly to the attack on Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
Well, I think it was a sense of relief for all of us because the tension, the waiting period was over. Saddam had all the chances, he didn't choose them, so I think people felt it's time for him to go.
Now, a lot of people have speculated this military campaign could last 6 months or 6 days. You've observed Saddam Hussein for years, know his capabilities. What do you think?
I think if there will be strategic strikes at all his bases and installations, it could take about 2 weeks. I also think the army could fold up and they could surrender en masse.
Well, now that's an interesting question because a lot of analysts have said that Saddam's army is paralyzed by fear. They know what will happen to them if they surrender, and a lot of people are discounting the fact they might surrender. Why do you think they might give up?
Well, they would give up because they are in close proximity to the Allied forces and they're far away from Saddam, so I think they will defect in thousands.
Now, so far, Saddam has tried no strikes against Saudi Arabia. Are you and other people here worried about possible terrorist actions?
Well, everybody in the Gulf is worried about any possible terrorist action, but I think people are ready. The government has issued a directive a couple of days ago warning any would-be terrorists or would-be default of security that they will be suffering severe penalty.
And one final question. You've observed Saddam, as I said, for years. If the campaign goes badly for him, do you think there's any chance he might surrender? The man is a man of many surprises. What do you think the scenarios might be?
Well, I don't think so he's going to commit suicide in his bunker, but I think he could try his best to escape because Saddam basically is a coward at heart.
So you think there would be no chance of him surrendering to the Allied forces?
No way, because he doesn't want to be tied up in chains and taken to court, and I mean his ego wouldn't permit him to do so.
Thank you very much. One view from here in Saudi Arabia in the very, very early hours of this campaign, which started approximately 6 hours ago here in Saudi Arabia. So far, the early reports militarily we're receiving is that at least the first flight of planes returned, U.S. and Saudi planes, without any casualties. That is from one Saudi official. We'll have to wait and see if that shows out to be true. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
Thanks, Charles. Well, it's just 8 minutes after 6 in the morning in Iraq. Dawn has not yet arrived. For 3 hours, U.S.-led forces in the Gulf have been bombarding Iraqi strategic targets in a massive and coordinated airstrike. After a tense 5-month standoff, war has come to the Gulf. 1 hour ago, President Bush addressed the nation and the world to explain what is happening and why.
Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities, and among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. While the world waited, Saddam sought to add to the chemical weapons arsenal he now possesses an infinitely more dangerous weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon. And while the world waited, while the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, to the entire world, including to our own economy. The United States, together with the United Nations, exhausted every means at our disposal to bring this crisis to a peaceful end. However, Saddam clearly felt that by stalling and threatening and defying the United Nations, he could weaken the forces arrayed against him.
President Bush says his objective is not the conquest of Iraq, but the liberation of Kuwait. He adds he hopes to bring home the U.S. troops in the Gulf region as soon as possible. The United States calls it Operation Desert Storm. CNN's Charles Crawford reports on what has happened since the anti-Iraqi alliance pulled the trigger less than 4 hours ago.
This is Something is happening outside.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun.
Reports say the long-awaited airstrikes hit Iraq with mammoth force. The first targets, as many as possible of Iraq's command and control centers, the eyes and ears of the Iraqi armed forces. Also, missile bases, anti-aircraft weapons, airports throughout Iraq. The weapons believed to be F-15 fighters, also F-4 fighters, and FB-111 fighter bombers. Allied officials confirm Saudi and British warplanes took part also. The apparent goal of the first wave of Allied air attacks, to clear a safe path for continued raids on Iraq and cut off Saddam Hussein from his estimated 545,000 troops in the Kuwaiti theater of operations. Then, reports from U.S. officials in the Persian Gulf, a safe return of the first wave of U.S. warplanes. General Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of the U.S.
determination to maintain his brutal occupation and his illegal annexation of Kuwait in defiance of world opinion. He has chosen to ignore the numerous opportunities that were open to him to withdraw. He has had 167 days since his illegal and brutal invasion of Kuwait on August 2nd, and 48 full days since the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 678 on November 29th. In all of that time, and with all of the requests, and with all of the appeals from leaders around the world, his answer has been no. Resolution 678 provided a pause for peace and gave Saddam Hussein one final opportunity to comply with the will of the world community as duly expressed through the United Nations. He refused again and again to take that opportunity. Diplomacy has been given every chance to end this conflict peacefully, but regrettably has failed in the face of Saddam Hussein's intransigence. That same intransigence and his indifference to the suffering of his own people made it clear that sanctions alone were not going to force him to leave Kuwait. There hasn't been a single iota of interest on his part in complying with United Nations directives. The time has regrettably come, therefore, to act in the interests of preserving world order and in safeguarding the effectiveness of the United Nations. A failure by the world community to act would have undermined the United Nations, turned a blind eye to naked aggression, condoned violations of international law, and encouraged other potential aggressors to defy world opinion in the pursuit of their own criminal ambitions. If Canada had stood aside, we would have betrayed our own national interests, repudiated our own responsibilities, and dishonored our own traditions. Canada did not stand aside in 2 world wars in Korea. Canada did not stand aside from the hard work of seeking a peaceful end to the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. And, Mr. Speaker, Canada is not standing aside tonight from giving effect to the United Nations resolutions. We have joined with other UN members in expelling Saddam Hussein from Kuwait by force. At this moment, our CF-18s are flying combat air patrol in the northern Persian Gulf, protecting Canadian and Allied ships and personnel in the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. Canadian ships are now engaged in the company of others, playing a vital role in assuring the support of the seaborne arm of the coalition in the Persian Gulf. Earlier this evening, the Cabinet met and gave the Chief of the Defence Staff, General de Chastelain, authority for the Canadian forces to carry out sweep and escort missions over Kuwait and Iraq, if necessary and appropriate. All Canadian forces in the Gulf will nevertheless remain under Canadian command. I profoundly regret, as I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, all members of this House do, that it has come to this. It is with no satisfaction that we take up arms, because war is always a tragedy. But the greater tragedy would have been for criminal aggression to go unchecked. I am sure that the safety of the Canadian servicemen and women in the Gulf is uppermost in the minds of all members. Our hearts go out tonight to those families with loved ones, fathers or mothers, sons and daughters and brothers and sisters on duty in the Persian Gulf. These courageous men and women are braving great danger in the defense of the values and the interests of their entire country. They have our gratitude and our respect, and especially tonight our prayers. Now is the time for all Canadians to put aside their differences and rally to their support. I am sure that all honourable members join me and all Canadians in praying that this war end quickly and that all Canadians welcome home our brave fellow citizens who defend freedom and the cause of peace. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, as honourable members know, military action began this evening.
Prime Minister Mulroney indicated that Canada did not stand aside, that CF-18s flew combat and escort patrol in the northern Persian Gulf. They're still doing that. Canadian ships in operation there. And the Cabinet was given authority to carry out sweep and escort missions. That authority was given to the Chief of the Defence Staff, Jean de Chastelain. Prime Minister Mulroney speaking in the House of Commons, and he indicated that the UN coalition has acted in the interest of preserving world order. Craig, you're standing outside the House. Any surprises from the Prime Minister?
Not really. The most significant remark he made from a news point of view was that the rules of engagement, as we said, predicted, have been changed. Canadian forces can now follow an active combat role, and that is to attack ground targets in Kuwait and Iraq, and also to escort fighters of other allied nations or bombers into Iraq and Kuwait. Up to now, they were forbidden to do that under the rules of engagement. That is a significant increase in Canada's combat role, and I think we can expect that if this war lasts very long, we will see Canadian casualties and see them fairly quickly, and that was said to me, in fact, by a Canadian military official just a few moments ago.
Pamela, would you like to comment?
Well, obviously, as Craig's pointed out, that is what I guess everyone expected would happen, but hearing it is a little bit chilling. The rules of engagement have changed. Canada is now at war. The Prime Minister also made an appeal to the opposition parties and to those thousands of Canadians who've been rallying on the streets of this country to protest this war. The time had come, he said, now to put the differences aside and offer their support for the troops now at war in the Gulf region. That isn't a request that I don't think will be answered at this point. I don't think it's a question of the critics not wanting our troops to be safe, sound, and be home as soon as possible, but I think some very profound differences exist in this country about this decision of the Prime Ministers and the decision of this country now to go to war.
Lloyd, can I just say that it will be most interesting in a few moments to see how the Liberal leader Jean Chrétien reacts. I am beginning to hear suggestions that the Liberal Party may shift its position that Canadian forces should immediately come home. And I note that Lloyd Axworthy, who was the architect of the Liberal Party's position up to now, has flown home to Winnipeg. He is not here to comment, and that makes me suspect at least that perhaps the Liberal Party, which came to that position, I must tell you, with great difficulty and hot internal debate, has decided that that is not the best course for them to follow. And as you know, the former leader of the Liberal Party, John Turner, tonight got up in the House of Commons and publicly disagreed with his party's position, which is quite damaging for Mr. Chrétien.
I think we also heard Craig Clyde Wells, the Premier of Newfoundland, another key Liberal, join with Mr. Turner in that position as opposed to joining with Mr. Chrétien.
Yes, the Liberals have had a lot of problems with this policy, obviously, Pam and Craig, whereas the NDP, at least there has been consistency there, and Audrey McLaughlin from the outset said that sanctions should continue. She has been saying that all along, that she could not support the final resolution from the United Nations on possible use of force. What are they going to do now? Do you think they'll just continue with that line?
Craig, go ahead on that one. I'm a little uncertain as to what might happen at this point.
The NDP have had a great deal of difficulty coming up with a position on this, and in fact, Ms. McLaughlin's position is not really all that clear. She kept saying sanctions should be given more time when it was obvious there was going to be a war. This is up to yesterday, up to last night.
It was quite an experience to feel it, to see it, to think about it, to think about what it means and why it was happening, and of course to report it. I'm going to yield here now to Peter Arnett and John Holloman.
Yes, Peter.
Hello, Lou. Peter Arnett here.
Hi.
Just a small observation. It has to be pretty unique in journalistic history to have a front row seat to one of the great air bombardments of history. I'd just like to point out that these are just the first shots in this war, and there are no indications yet, we may have them later in the day, how Saddam Hussein feels about it, but he has a 1 million-man strong army. He said he will fight on with the cry, Allahu Akbar, God is great. And these are the first shots, and from this vantage point in Baghdad, we'll be interested to see how these events unfold from here. I'd like to hand you to John Holloman now.
Lou, what I'm going to do for you is look out the window and tell you what I see. It's something I do pretty well. I'll tell you, about 3 hours ago, the sky was brightly lighted with the tracer rounds from the anti-aircraft guns. Right now, the early morning fog that has inhabited Baghdad each early morning for the past several days is beginning to roll back in. But out on the 8-lane highway, which runs in front of our hotel, there are signs of early morning traffic. We've reported to you for many months that the society in Iraq is very well organized, and despite the fact that there was a major air attack here just a few hours ago, the morning commuter buses that are supposed to take off and drive down to the downtown bus station at this hour are on the road, and they're driving down to the bus station. As Bernie reported, we saw a hook and ladder fire truck go by, I guess about 10 or 15 minutes ago. We've also heard some small arms fire out the window in the past few minutes, but no sign of the conflagration in the skies that we reported to you on a few hours back. Downtown Baghdad really looks pretty calm right now, and the events of 3 hours ago seem to fade into memory. Bernie?
Thanks, John. We have a brother of the profession here, Don Kirk of USA Today, and this is our first eyewitness account from somebody who was outside where we've been reporting from. Don, how did you manage to make it back from the American Embassy to here?
I just drove back in the same taxi that took me to the embassy. He hadn't gotten his fare yet, so he wanted to get a full fare, so he took me back through darkened streets. There was tracer fire all over the sky on both sides of the river, but the streets were dark and calm and somewhat eerie, and there was no sign of bombing or bomb damage in the center of the city through which I drove, which doesn't mean to say that something didn't fall while I was still at the embassy. The reason I was at the American Embassy, incidentally, was that I had an open phone line to USA Today when the anti-aircraft fire began going off. I called them once more, and the line went down moments later, leaving me with no way to communicate. I came back here, and the first thing that happened to me was that they put me in the bomb shelter along with a whole lot of other journalists who were stuck down there. I managed to sort of exfiltrate my way out and up to where I am now through a back stairs.
As you were driving back in your taxi, Don Kirk of USA Today, what were you able to see on the streets in terms of people?
There were no people on the streets. There were some cars on the streets. My driver wanted to drive with his lights out, running the risk of a rather serious accident. I persuaded him to put his dim lights on from time to time. We passed some other cars, some with dim lights on, some totally dark. There were no people on the streets, and incidentally, there were no signs of military on the streets. I did see some police cars go roaring by, and a couple of taxis madly dashing through the night, but that was about it. Don, any signs of damage from this attack anywhere between here and the U.S. Embassy? I didn't see a single sign of damage, and I might add that I went a route that took me by the presidential palace. Now, for all I know, the palace was not even there when I went by it, but the place was totally dark and silent as I went by. From the embassy, there was AAA anti-aircraft artillery going off around the embassy and around the palace very heavily with tracer bullets of differing colors all over the place. I heard a couple of thunderous explosions, which I guess you guys heard too, which was...
We not only heard them, we felt them. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney has confirmed that there They were going after strategic targets and such things as command control centers, anti-aircraft batteries. The intention, according to the Pentagon, was to blind Saddam Hussein and to cut him off from being able to communicate with his troops to the south of here.
Well, certainly there's no communication. There's no local telephone at this point. You can't even call another room where we are, and there's no communication overseas. Telexes are out, phones are out, and this means here is about the only one that I know, which is one reason why I happen to join you here.
Well, it's good to have you, brother. We're glad you're safe, and if the people at USA Today are listening, he looks quite safe to me, just a little bit winded. You have to go 14 stories high to get up here to the CNN broadcast position. Let me pause for a moment just in case our colleagues along the way have something to ask us or if they want to go somewhere else.
No, nothing here, Bernie. We're fascinated by what you have to say there.
Okay, we will... Is that